Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fan fiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and Accio headphones and let the magic begin.
All right, we're back with chapter 15 of Greenlight by SerenMusafir. Let's get started. Chapter 15. The Desert Knows. The desert remembers, and amongst the dead grows a desert rose. Sophia Aljabar, 1915. Hermione stares at Malfoy. Her head is heavy from a hangover that is threatening to pierce behind her eyes, but that still wouldn't be the reason why she can't comprehend what she's seeing. He isn't supposed to be sleeping here. Amina found Hermione on the top of the staircase as she crept out of Malfoy's room, gingerly shutting the door behind her. That image of Amina would have been shocking if Hermione hadn't been transfixed by the striking white of Malfoy's hair from where she stood on the steps. Apparently, Malfoy had asked to switch sleeping spots for the night, just to make sure, he told her last night, of what he hadn't clarified. The first break of dawn filters through the back doors, creating slants of blue rays that radiate off his hair to create shadows along his body. She woke up intending to go for a swim in hopes of drawing the impending headache away. But for that, she needs to stop staring. He isn't supposed to be sleeping here. Hermione isn't sure why she's so caught up on this fact, but it's unnerving to see him unguarded, even though the way his body coils with strained tension gives the impression he's moments away from jerking awake. She seems to defy all laws of gravity by the way his body seamlessly curves across the sofa that is much too small for him. His chest slowly rises and falls with each breath that hitches and struggles to escape his body, and Hermione simply can't look away. She doesn't know what it is, what she can pinpoint that prevents her from moving from where she stands now beside the sofa he sleeps on. Her eyes linger on his face, taking in the slight line between his brows, the tight set of his lips, and the gentle fall of his hair across his forehead. The muscles in his cheeks twitch slightly as though he's flinching from something in his sleep, and it's cruel. She knows, but she watches his eyes move rapidly behind closed lids, and she can't help but feel relieved, because Hermione hasn't had a restful night of sleep in years, and it seems that maybe Malfoy hasn't either, and she's not alone in this. She's not alone. Reluctantly, her eyes travel away from his face. His left hand holds his journal against the flat plane of his stomach in a grip so tight she can't help but wonder who he thinks will steal it away from him. She puts her hands behind her back to stop herself from taking it. His right arm dangles off the sofa, the sleeve of his white shirt rolled up to his forearm. His skin is so pale, so translucent, like the wings of a dragonfly. She hopes he's brought sunscreen because his porcelain skin won't survive in the desert sun otherwise. She can make up the green veins that travel under his skin, carving roads and valleys from his arm up and down to his palm, and Hermione edges towards him to get a closer look. She shouldn't. She really should not touch him, because though Amina told her of noise concealment around the room, Hermione knows there's no way he won't wake up the moment she touches his skin. Malfoy is too riled, unconscious or not attack her if she does. So instead, her eyes follow the maps under his skin, down his forearm, into the wrist, where the vein forks off into his hand. She's entirely fascinated by the small mole nestled in the corner where his wrist connects with the joint of his thumb. Goosebumps suddenly scatter across his forearm, and Hermione looks up to find Malfoy awake, watching her. She watches him back, acutely aware of how insane she must look to him, standing over his body and head bent over his hand like some sort of summoner. Silence stirs between them like a cloak that is neither comfortable nor heavy, and when it looks like he won't say anything first, she chooses to speak up about the things she's most embarrassed about. I don't remember anything. It comes out rushed and unconvincing even to her ears, but Hermione doesn't care if it's a cheap cop out. There is simply no way she's acknowledging the foolishness of her behavior or the fact that she truly cannot handle her liquor from last night. She clarifies when his face gives no way of understanding. Malfoy blinks, eyes lidded and dark as though they're still weighed down by sleep. I don't remember anything either, he responds, at last, his voice rasping against his throat. The warm timbre and the husky undertone makes her want to crawl onto the sofa with him, even though her stomach twists painfully at his words. Must have drank too much. Oh, Hermione frowns, not understanding. But you said you didn't drink at all. She regrets it the moment his lips curve into his typical all-knowing smirk. Huh. Weird how memory works. Malfoy adjusts himself on the sofa, turning slightly to face the cushion and shifting his right arm over his eyes. Don't worry, though. The night's a haze anyway, and I most definitely do not remember you saying you want to eat me. At that, her jaw drops and her face burns. Her legs finally regain movement, and she leaves, palms covering her face and vowing to never touch another drop of alcohol ever again. Hermione saw her first thestral before she ever directly saw death. It was the month before she obliviated her parents when Hermione stumbled across the creature behind a safe house. She wasn't sure what exactly it was at first, having never seen one outside of pictures and only ever ridden them in their invisible form. The ringed reptilian-like horse was an ominous image to behold, but perhaps the most grievous concern for Hermione was the singular question, why? She panicked, trying to understand who she lost, whose death she'd seen but hadn't fully acknowledged or understand. Death was still a novelty for her at that point of the war, and complete lack of answer as to how she could see the creature only spiraled her further into complete chaos as she re-entered the safe house. Lupin found her, trembling and clutching at the staircase, her knees threatening to buckle under her weight. He had to practically drag her to a closed corridor to calm her down, and between broken sobs she managed to tell him what she'd seen. Lupin, the ever anchor to the children of the Order and the unfortunate recipient of most nervous breakdowns, only held her and listened patiently. It wasn't until Hermione blurted out what she'd done with her parents that he finally spoke up. Perhaps, he said gently, holding Hermione firmly by her shoulders, being forgotten while alive is to witness the death of its own accord. The likely answer, he reasoned later, was that perhaps during the transport of Harry from the Dursleys, she'd seen the death of Hedwig or Moody. But Hermione had already taken his previous words to heart, felt every word until she stopped weeping for who she could have lost and instead for what she had lost. A death of its own accord. To be erased from the world, to lose all marks of what she had left behind simply because she was forgotten. The months following that incident and then the end of the war left her feeling hollow, completely carved out until she was a vessel that could hold no one, especially not herself. There was no weight to her body. Hermione simply walked without any footsteps. But she is right here. She lives standing in the frigid ocean, far away from home, but present nevertheless. No one sees her in the water, and no one witnesses her taking shaky breaths because of the cold against her skin. The shadows her body casts in the water are noted by no one except for her. And yet, if no one sees her being here except for herself, is it enough for her anyway? If the only reflection she sees in the mirror is herself, that is enough too. Moments, Hermione realizes, are short, but memories are oh so long, and while she might be forgotten at one point, it is enough if she is the only one who remembers what once happened and will happen now. Hermione dips her hand into the water and watches as the water creates boundless ripples. The change to the order of the water, a minuscule yet significant disorder, fills her up once more until she is a vessel refilled. Then, with a deep breath, Hermione lowers herself beneath the surface and into the darkness of the water, thinking nothing other than her truth. I am here. They stop talking the moment she enters inside. Idris and Malfoy, both standing on the staircase, watch her waddle in wet clothes into the house and the front corridor. Without glancing up at them, she trudges her way to the stairs, the squeaking of every movement echoing in the quietness of the room. She hadn't bothered with a drying spell, preferring instead to let the cold seep into her skin after an hour of oculating. "Everything okay, Hermione?" Idris asked hesitantly, moving down the stairs to make room for her on the steps. She's aware she looks rather frightful than how she feels. Her fingers pruned and wrinkly and her lips tinted pale blue from staying in the water longer than she should have. Hermione nods, pushing a limp strand of hair away from her face, and she walks up to the level just below where Malfoy stands and looks at him warily when he shifts, a movement so slightly that it'd seem unintentional if she wasn't always paying close attention to him, to block her path. Her stomach flips when she smells vanilla. Idris mentions leaving soon as he heads out the door, and Malfoy nods his way absently, his eyes not straying away from her. She needs to tilt her head back slightly to maintain eye contact as he remains on the step up, still in her way. "Are you going into town?" "Why are you wet, Granger?" "I want to come as well." He studies her for a moment longer before stepping down to her level, forcing Hermione to push back against the wall and allow him to do so. "What were you doing?" he asks, going down another step. The warmth from his skin radiates against her frigid skin as his body just barely grazes the side of hers. She thinks maybe the slight touch between the links of their bodies lingers longer than it needs to as he moves, or maybe time always stretches to such an extent that she feels every second and every touch between them. Either way, she ends up holding her breath at the slight sensation, her eyes fluttering. Clearly, I was in the water. She tries to sound sardonic, but her voice comes out quiet and shaky as a shiver runs through her body. She gets a strange sense of deja vu standing a little higher up on the stairs, even though he's still taller than her. Pathetic. Pathetic. She scolds herself when her pulse quickens. "I need some things from town. Write down what you need and I'll get it for you." Hermione shoots him an annoyed look and digs into her beaded bag for a pen and paper, knowing he won't be able to get all the things for her unless she comes along. She writes down the 2 things she needs and hands the slip over to him. A look of puzzlement flashes across Malfoy's face as he glances at the paper and then back at her. "What is that?" "It's just 2 words, Malfoy," she sniffs, raising her nose at him. She pretends not to remember the several times Harry mentioned how her script can resemble owl scratches. "Oranges and books. My writing isn't bad." "It's horrendous." He reaches for the pen in her hand and eyes it suspiciously, turning it around to assess the tip. "I meant this." "Oh." It's always jarring to remember the differences between the magical world and muggles. "It's a pen. Muggles use it to write things down, much like a quill. Here, like this." She takes the pen back and writes on her palm to show him. Then she twists the side of the pen and a little blade pops out from the other side. "But this one can also be used as a knife, so be careful." She waits for a snide remark, but he's less surprised by her carrying knives around with her and more confused by the peculiar workings of the pen. She turns it around for him to take, but Malfoy ignores her and reaches for her hand instead, jerking her toward him so he can bring her palm close to his face to assess the ink she's left behind. The sudden movement makes her jump, and she needs to grab onto the rail so she doesn't collide into him. Hermione watches completely still as he brushes his thumb over the ink with a level of gentleness she'd never expect from him. The faint lines form between his brows. His mouth twists in concentration, and when his warm breath fans across her skin, she shivers for a reason other than being cold. She savors the heat from his hands, which practically engulfs hers in the tight hold he has her in, allowing it to travel down her wrist, up her arm, across her chest, and to the rest of her body. His hand is warm and strong in a way she's never known before, and his fingers splayed across the back of her hand brush against her skin in an entirely different way that causes goosebumps to form across her arm. She'd never truly known until now, she realizes, just how cold she's been, or how hands were meant to hold each other just like this, and the word safe means the way she feels right now. "You're always so cold," Malfoy murmurs, as if he too can understand what she's thinking. He's no longer just looking at the ink, his thumb tracing the lines of her palm to find the answers there. His jaw clenches with such intensity that it looks almost painful, but then he drops her hand as if scalded by the frost. His right hand, that had been just holding hers, slides across his chest and to his neck, and she stares at it, feeling disoriented and wondering how things can look so different when they're gone. He doesn't glance at her as he takes the pen still in the other hand, pockets it, and turns to make his way down the remaining steps. "We're leaving in 10 minutes." She's left standing on the staircase, hands clasped together in a fist like a prayer. It takes her a few minutes to understand what he said before she jolts back and hurries up to her room to get ready, knowing he won't wait for her. Halfway to town, Idris pulls to the side of the road. He stops the car and jumps out of the car. Hermione, who's sitting in the front, watches in confusion as Malfoy steps out as well and switches positions with Idris to get behind the wheel. "Is everything okay?" she asks, twisting to glance at Idris. "The key is already in," Idris explains to Malfoy. He moves closer to the front to shift in the space between Hermione and Malfoy. "Change the gear to drive and very slowly edge your foot down to accelerate." Hermione gapes at Malfoy. "What are you doing?" "I am driving, Granger," he bristles, tone caustic. "You don't know how to drive." "Which is why I'm practicing." "I'd rather not die, Malfoy." "Then be quiet and let me drive," he snaps. Hermione scowls, sitting back in her seat to face the front. Under Idris's instructions, Malfoy managed to very gently turn the wheel and steer the car back onto the road. She watches him from the corner of her eyes for a fault, but he remains fixated on the road, teeth studiously biting the corner of his lips. His eyes flick between the rearview mirror and the road in front as Idris guides him on how to slowly ease the car around a curve. She unwillingly admits to herself that it's endearing to watch him do something so muggle and completely new and out of his element. But when Malfoy accelerates a little too quickly and then jerks the car to a slower pace, she can't help but grip the side of the car dramatically and whirl to him and say, "You're putting too much pressure on the accelerator." "Got it, Granger." Your foot doesn't need to press down completely once you're on the road. It's best to remain at a steady speed. Granger, I swear, if you don't just let me drive, I'm trying to help you. I don't need your damn help. I have Idris telling me already what to do, and I don't need your fucking input on top of it. If you want to help, be quiet. And Dad used to say that when driving, you must assume everyone on the road is blind. There's no one here. Idris interjects, pointing at the road. Careful, Draco. The roads are a little slippery still from the rain. Malfoy speeds up, eyes snapping toward her in challenge. She glares at him, her heart thumping at such a frantic pace that she worries she might have a heart attack. "Malfoy, slow down." He raises a single suggestive brow, and Hermione holds her breath when he doesn't turn his head back to the road. She's not scared, she realizes. The anticipation of pushing just to the edge is exhilarating, and that's it. It's a wild sensation, accelerating out of control with him. But it's nothing like fear, and it's almost worse this way because it's liberation with no end. You really can't help but try to control everything, can you? "Keep your eyes on the road," she says breathlessly. Adrenaline makes her nauseous and she holds onto the door. "If it's all the same to you, I'd rather just watch you." "Malfoy," scared Granger. "You're mad." "You look tense." "If I die, Malfoy, I will haunt you." "Don't make promises you can't keep, Granger." It comes out quiet and traced with a meaning she's too flustered to understand, but Malfoy lingers on her face for just a mere second before turning to the front. A layer of stillness envelops him, and she's left staring, unsettled by what's past. "Draco, just make sure to steer clear of the pothole," Idris says. She tears her eyes away from the side of Malfoy's face and to the road just ahead, long enough to say, "Malfoy, watch out!" Malfoy jerks the car to the left, and Hermione quickly reaches for the wheel out of sheer instinct, turning back to the right. "Fucking let go, Granger!" Hermione drops her hands right away, but the car only swerves the opposite side, skidding over mud as Malfoy tries to steer clear of the pothole. Out of control, Idris yells at Malfoy to press down on the brake, but the sudden movement causes it to veer off the road instead. Hermione lurches towards the dashboard, eyes squeezing shut, and Malfoy lets go of the wheel completely, both of his arms flying across her body to stop her as the car falls into a ditch. Hermione clutches onto his hands against her stomach, wide-eyed and grasping for air. Shocked, she slowly turns to Malfoy and she manages through heavy pants. "Are you okay?" His eyes narrow dangerously as she yanks his hand off her body. "What did you do?" Hermione's jaw drops. "What did I do? What did you do? Why did you let go of the wheel? You were going to slam against the fucking window if I hadn't stopped you." "I'm wearing a seatbelt," she exclaims, tugging the belt strap to her chest that is sure to leave a bruise behind. His eyes drop to the belt as if he's just seeing it for the first time. He stares at it accusingly and runs a hand through his hair in frustration. Idris pops in between them. "Is everyone okay?" Malfoy jumps out of the car instead of replying, and Hermione follows after him with shaky legs. Hermione moves to stand beside Malfoy, Idris falling close behind as he glares at the car as if to question its audacity of driving them into a ditch. They took the car in dismay. There's no smoke or shattered parts, but it looks incredibly stuck in the mud. "This may be a problem," Idris says, finally. Hermione immediately starts digging into her bag, going elbow deep as her hands bump into objects she's organized. "Maybe I've got something to help us. A rope, perhaps. What do you think we need?" "A time turner would help," Malfoy suggests dryly, "so I can go back and fucking stop myself from ever coming on this trip." "You're not being helpful," she snaps, looking up to glare at him. "We wouldn't even be in this place if it wasn't for your damn need to be the savior at all times," he hisses. "If it wasn't for your need to prove that you could do everything by yourself at all times, I was driving just fine before your fucking Gryffindor tendencies kicked in. You're the only one who can't allow someone to help you or try to get us back on the road. What is the point of even being this stubborn? What the hell does it even prove? I could say the same thing about you too, Malfoy." "I think we should try to take it out, but I'll need Tony and the other car," Idris interrupts, hands on his hips as he walks around to assess the damage. "It doesn't look like a fire hazard, but we should stay away from it, just to make sure. Can either of you send a Patronus?" Hermione doesn't respond. She hasn't been able to cast a proper Patronus in years, with several failed attempts, and she's sure as hell not going to try and fail in front of Malfoy right now. Though she does glance at him curiously when he doesn't speak up either. Idris scratches his temples, eyes shifting awkwardly between the two, and then clear tension emanating. "The apparition walls are further down near town, and I can head over there and apparate to get Tony to help take the car out. It shouldn't take long, so you guys can stay here in case someone drives by." "We'll come with you," Malfoy says instantly. "I'm not that skilled at side-along apparition," Idris replies. He looks at Hermione with clear apprehension that states his patience is running rather thin the longer he stays with the both of them. "Fine, Granger stays and I'll come. We'll both stay," Hermione cuts in, ignoring the sharp look Malfoy throws her way. "You can go ahead, Idris. We'll wait for you." Malfoy glowers but doesn't argue as Idris leaves. He turns away swiftly, watching Idris walk away down the road. Anger practically radiates off him like a hot furnace, and he remains with his arms crossed, eyes fixated at the point in the distance as if his mere stance can will someone to remove him from his misery for several minutes. When he makes no move to face her, she turns back to the damage, growing equally frustrated. "You know," she starts, toeing the stones beneath her shoes. "If we try to determine what happened, I'm sure an objective perspective would note that this is hardly my fault. I merely tried to help the situation." "Never in my dreams," he grumbles. "Never in my wildest fucking dreams." Hermione almost gives herself a headache at the eye roll. "This isn't exactly the time of my life either, Malfoy. I have things I need to get done before we leave, and now because of you, I doubt I'll be able to do any of it. I think I'm more inconvenienced by this." "Where are you going, Malfoy?" "You have things to do, don't you?" "Yes, but I really think we should stay here," he calls after him, and she walks down in the direction in which Idris left. "Idris told us to stay, and I think we should wait for him to come. Malfoy!" He doesn't even turn to look at her. "Are you coming or what, Granger?" Hermione glances at the car, unsure, and then back at Malfoy. It takes her less than a second to make a decision, and she's off, running after him. His long legs make it difficult for her to catch up to him, and 5 minutes pass of him not slowing down for her that she has to speak up. "Would you slow down? Just hurry up." "I'm trying," she grits out. She imagines the ground cracking open and Malfoy sinking into the quicksand begging for her help. Not enough, obviously. Hermione glares at his back, hoping he can feel the intensity of her scorn. "You're not exactly making this easy, you know. What if something comes up and grabs me and takes me into the trees? You wouldn't even know if I died, let alone do something to stop it. Keep up with your incessant heavy breathing and I'll know you're alive." "I do not breathe heavily," she says hotly. "Besides, I highly doubt you die, Granger," he continues, oblivious to the immense effort she's putting to even hear him clearly. "I've come to realize that the universe has a personal score it needs to settle with me these days, and it's very keen on making sure I am tormented at every step of this damned trip." "Right, because your constant presence has been just a delight for me. It truly never ends, and I suspect I'll be stuck with your face in my head even after I return home. At least I'm memorable." "Yeah, like a nightmare." Hermione stops walking, holds her breath. 1 second, then two, and Malfoy whirls around, eyes searching. The look dissolves immediately when he realizes what he's done. He glares at her, either annoyed at himself for falling for it, or at her for making him fall for it. And she can't help but smirk as she passes him. Tormented, indeed. They walk on separate sides of the road. A warm breeze rattles through the trees surrounding the dirt road, and Hermione raises her hand to catch the fractured sunbeams with her fingers. "You know how when we were children, if we were ever upset about something, we would just scream in the middle of the market or sit down and throw a tantrum simply because we could?" Malfoy doesn't reply right away, and she stares at him until he spares an inconvenienced glance her way. "We don't need to talk, Granger." "I'm not going to walk in silence." "Well, don't confuse this utter look of boredom as an interest in what you're going to say." "It's kind of hard to differentiate between your looks because you only have one stoic face," Hermione fires back, and then pauses to twist her face into a semblance of his. Malfoy stares at her. "What are you doing?" "I'm trying to replicate the look you always have going on." "You look ridiculous." "Yes, I'm glad you agree." Her smirk turns into a frown when he continues walking. "Malfoy, you promised." He exhales an insufferable long breath, lifts his eyes to the sky as if to demand why, and then looks back at her. "Go on." I remember once when I was 5, Hermione continues, transfiguring a wooden branch into a walking stick, and I dropped an ice cream cone that Mum got for me, and I was so incredibly upset because I waited all day at school for it. I sat down beside the cone on the ground and cried so loud that people stopped to stare at me, and Mum had to go get another cone. I'm having a hard time picturing perfect Granger screaming or crying about anything. Did you go home and write an apology letter to everyone who heard you? Hermione ignores him. It was different when I was a child. I didn't have to be proper because no one expected me to be, which of course was the case for all children. And kind of the point of it, right? We were children, and that's all that was expected of us. We could do preposterous and rightfully lunatic things and get away with it because we didn't know better. But I don't even think it was to get something in return or to have something done for us. I think sometimes that moment of complete release is more satisfying because you're just letting go without a care of what anyone would say to you. You can still let go, Granger. Well, sure, I can go into my room and cry, but it's not as cathartic as just screaming in the middle of a crowd, is it? I can't do that. Malfoy stops to face her. Why not? Hermione gives him a pointed look. I'm sure your natural need to throw tantrums is very much alive, but unfortunately, there are rules of civility that the rest of us have to follow. I can't just scream at someone because they skipped a line, or when I'm being followed around for photos. Malfoy crosses the distance between them. You're saying you could do that as a child, but you were still a child when you were doing things children should never have to do. Hermione shakes her head. That was special circumstance. The ward made everyone do things they never should have done. And now, he counters evenly, isn't the aftermath of the war or being a war hero a special circumstance? You should be allowed to do things and get away with it, Granger. I suspect you wouldn't say the same thing about Harry or Ron. Malfoy's face twists in distaste. I doubt they're thinking of being proper and respectful in public and even considering other people's sensitivities. One word to Weasel, barbarism in him wouldn't even hesitate to try to defend his so-called honor. It's not the same, she says flatly. Fine, do it now then. Do what? He waves a hand at her impatiently. Go on. If you can't do it back home because of what others might say, do it now. There's no one here to judge if you're being proper or civil. I don't understand what you want me to do. I want to hear you scream, Granger. She stares at him incredulously. You want me to scream. Right now. Yes, Granger, scream. His voice is strained as if resisting calling her out on losing all functions of her brain. What are you afraid of disrupting? The birds? Worried they might judge you for screaming in the middle of nowhere? What the hell are you so afraid of? I'm not afraid. She trails off, unsure what it is that's even stopping her. Why do you hesitate? He asks slowly. He edges closer to her and she takes an instinctive step back. His eyes jump across her face and something like anger flashes behind them as he says, Fucking hell, what did they do to you? The space between them gets smaller even when she takes another step back. You were fucking frightening, Granger, he says quietly, disbelief stark across his face. The look you'd get in your eyes when you wanted something or the way you stood up for the fucking house elves, it was downright terrifying to see you get things done with such intensity because it seemed as if nothing could get in your way. It's there now when you want to say something to me, but when it's about you, what you want to do, you just give up. You want to let go, and you have this moment to do so, Granger. What are you going to do? Hermione stares back, eyes wide, lips parted. She didn't think he thought of her that way. It never occurred to her that he had any opinion of her other than his natural disdain. She swallows the thickness in her throat, feeling restless under his expectant gaze. She doesn't think he's going to let go of this so easily. They're not leaving until something comes out of her. It's insane, rightfully insane, but a small voice in the back of her head urges her forward to do it. She looks nervously away from him, around the trees, at the empty road. She nods slowly, more to convince herself, and Malfoy moves back to give her space. She palms her face, because if she can't see him, then he can't see her, and the embarrassment is not as physical. The key is to not think, she tells herself. It doesn't have to be a certain pitch or intensity, no right way to do it other than to just open your mouth and Hermione screams. The sound gets stuck halfway in her throat and comes out resembling a strangled cry. She peeks through her fingers and Malfoy stares back at her, looking baffled and unsure what's about to happen. And unsure about what's just happened, he blinks slowly. What the fuck was that? You said to scream. That was me screaming. You're bloody terrible at this, he retorts, shaking his head in disappointment. Really, it's the fault of all the men you fucked, because if this is how you're screaming, I can only sympathize with you. Don't be a pig, Malfoy, she snaps. If you're not happy with it, just tell me how to do it. There aren't any instructions on how to do it. You just fucking scream and let it go. Hermione lets go. Body clenching and eyes squinting shut, Hermione lets go of a heart-clenching sound that stems from the pit of her stomach and travels a furious path up her throat. It leaves her heaving and her throat burning, but she's less aware of the pain and more of the need to do it again. It's like something dormant and twisted in her chest is unleashed because she barely has time to take another breath before she's screaming once more. She's barely aware of Malfoy in the back saying, "Louder." Somewhere a flock of birds set off, startled by the sound as she screams and screams. As she releases the forced slumber, the anger of what's happened, the grief of what's lost, the extinguished fire and never-ending cold that takes up her life. When she's done, Hermione looks up, breathing heavily and throat aching. "Let's go," is all he says when he meets her eyes. Short and brisk. And she'd scowl at the indifference in his voice if she didn't catch the brief moment of satisfaction in his eyes when he starts walking again. Hermione runs her tongue across her dry lips, eyes falling to the ground before fixing on his back. A slow grin etches across her lips, and she needs a moment to just feel the sheer exuberance in her chest before inhaling a deep breath and going to where Malfoy waits for her. "If today was the last day of the universe, what would you change?" Malfoy gives her an exaggerated, stricken look. "My last day, and I have to spend it with you?" He halts when Hermione stops to pick up a small gray stone on the ground. She brushes the dirt off the smooth edge and raises it to suspect it under the sunlight. She frowns at the dullness and chucks it into the trees, resuming her walk as Malfoy follows. "I'd be spending it with you too, you know." "Why would today be the last day?" Hermione shrugs. "I don't know. Anything can happen, really. Maybe the world will explode out of nowhere. If the world exploded without warning, there wouldn't be any time to do anything, would there? But there's been research done that gives us an idea in advance as to how it might happen. While some think that the end of the world will be a complete cycle where we follow a second meteor strike, I think it's more likely that we die because of heat death. Heat death. Technically, the entire universe has been expanding through the years into disorder, and the majority of the stars in the universe have already been produced such that only a remaining portion is left to be created, simply because the universe is speeding towards the end. In fact, the light we see from the stars takes billions of years to travel through space for us to see, so I suppose when we see stars, what we're really seeing is a version of the past and of creation that has already occurred and is being limited further in creation. But eventually, the expansion of the universe will be so large that all the energy of the galaxies and stars will go out, and there will be nothing but death and darkness and cold. It will be cold at the end of the world. A moment of silence passes, and then, "Fucking hell, Granger, I asked a question, not an entire thesis on astronomy." "Well, you asked," Hermione huffs. "How am I not supposed to answer a question?" "Unbelievable. Fucking citations and an entire table of contents. Why would you ask if you didn't want to know? How do you have friends? You must be such a riot. I'm done. I'm done talking to you, Malfoy." "If you're crying about it, finish what?" "As if I'd waste actual tears on you. Just finish your damn essay, Granger." Hermione snaps her mouth shut and glares at him. Malfoy's lips twitch. "Anything can happen at any time, Granger. The trees could burst into flames, or the air can turn into poison. Or the ice caps could melt, and creatures and bacteria that have been innovated for years can spread around the world as disease, and we'd drown. The point is that none of it would be under our control, because the moment it happened, it'd be far too late for us to stop it. Then there's the fact that the world wouldn't even need to go into darkness for me to die in the next second." Hermione nods reluctantly. She knows this, is rational enough to have already considered this. But doesn't it make you anxious to think there are only limited things we can do at this moment in such limited time to do it still? Malfoy kicks a stone and Hermione watches it fly across the path. "What do you need to do on the last day that you can't do any other day?" "If today was the last day of the universe, I'd want to tell everyone I cared about that I loved them, but I couldn't do it because I'm here with you." "If I told you I loved you and then we died in the next minute, it wouldn't matter because we would be dead, Granger." "Fine. I'm talking about how things would change if we knew today was the last day. If I knew today was the last day, I'd feel this immense pressure to do everything right and make sure that it stretched to its maximum possibilities. But that's just the thing, Granger. The days are limited, and the truth is that there will never be enough time to do it all. Even if you knew when you were going to die, it would be impossible physically for you to do anything more than what you can do on a normal day. There's no reality in which you'll ever get to do what you want to, which is why you need to prioritize the things you can focus on and live a life fulfilling those. If you spend all day today worrying whether you'll die, or if you'll get to do any of the things you want to do before you die, 70 years from now, when you're on your deathbed, you'll look back and all you'll have are years of nothing substantial. I don't know. She frowns, trying to find the best words to articulate what she means. I guess I've always wondered about the destruction of reality as we know it, whether it's a singular event that takes out the whole universe or just me. I've had this feeling that time is running out. I've always thought I'd die young. Malfoy looks at her sharply then, and she stumbles to a halt when she realizes he stopped walking. Since when? During the war, didn't you ever think that each day was going to be your last? No, he replies carefully. That was the point of it all. Hermione looks down at her hands, at the tortured skin around her nails. There was a moment where Harry believed that he had to die to destroy Voldemort. He had to go into the forest, and I would have gone with him if he'd let me. But I knew he was a Horcrux before he did, and I also knew I was going to ask to go with him before I actually did. I think the whole time while I was fighting, I thought there would be a time where to win would mean to die. Winning the war was never about winning it for me. Hermione glances at Malfoy and flushes, feeling deeply embarrassed when he stares back at her with a strange, dark look on his face. Fucking Gryffindors, he mutters under his breath, and then raises his voice laced with anger to say, We might not die today, Granger, but you will die by thinking yourself into a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. I'm being serious, Malfoy. So am I. You need to stop stressing about things that are not in your control. Nothing I ever say to you about letting go would matter if you hang on to this. You've got to be okay with what you have right now. This is it. There's nothing more. It's just a moment's breath. And you? Are you okay with what you have right now? Malfoy locks his eyes with her gaze unwavering. I wouldn't change anything, Granger. I'm just afraid it'll all be taken away, she breathes. I know, he says after a moment. The town is busier than last time she'd been here, but it feels good to hear the bustle of the crowds and the music flowing through the windows. A welcome change from the predictable steadiness of being near the ocean. Hermione glances at Malfoy as they weave through the crowds. He looks apprehensive, eyes darting around as he makes sure to steer away from large groups but still remain close to her. She isn't sure what it is that Malfoy needs to get done, but Hermione needs to get to a bookshop Amina told her to visit. Hermione mentioned earlier in the morning wanting to get some books for research on the scripts written in Sophia's diary, and Amina noted there was a bookshop with some dated research books that might be helpful. When it becomes clear they aren't going to get anywhere without help, Hermione ducks into a flower shop to ask for directions. The merchant in the front is an older woman who smiles at them with a toothy grin when they enter. Come in, come in. What can I do for you today? Hello, Hermione hands him the slip with the name Amina scribbled down. We're looking to get to this bookshop. Ah, yes, Hakim can be difficult to find. The man replies, squinting at the writing. I'm not sure if he's still at the shop at this time in the day, but you won't be able to find it if it's your first time going. My grandson can take you there. Thank you. We'd appreciate that. What brings you here? He asks, handing the slip back. We're just passing through. Malfoy cuts in. At the same time, Hermione says we're looking for Kahif al-Noor. The merchant freezes, all blood leaving his face. Hermione ignores the glare Malfoy sends her. It was agreed with the group to not share what they were doing in the desert to make sure they are given the privacy to do what they needed to and not be deterred by other groups. Amina had warned them that people might either stop them from looking or follow close behind to maybe lay claim before they do. But too many people are relying on Hermione, who's still clueless enough about the diary and its content that she figures any information could be helpful. Do you know of it? Hermione asks, studying the man carefully. No, we don't talk about that place here. The merchant shakes his head, eyes shifting between them with unease. Too much death, too many people coming and never leaving. Hermione frowns. What do you mean? Nothing. We don't talk about that here, he repeats and shakes his head as if to clear his mind of the thoughts. He grins suddenly, reaching under the counter and bringing out a rose for Hermione. How about a rose for a desert rose? Hermione hesitates, still stuck on the merchant's odd reaction about the cave. She wants to ask more questions, needs more answers. She glances at Malfoy, who looks as puzzled as her, but sends her a look that says to not push it. Hermione reluctantly turns to the older man and takes the rose with a smile. Thank you, it's beautiful. Please, keep it as a gift, the merchant says solemnly when Hermione reaches into her bag to pay, and as a promise that you will come back again. Come back safe and alive from the desert again, are his unspoken words. Hermione thanks him again and gingerly places the rose inside her bag. Hermione nervously rolling around on the ominous unsaid message. Amin, the merchant calls over his shoulder. A young boy comes out of the back door and the man tells him something in Arabic and the boy nods, grinning at Hermione. Amin will take you to Hakim, the merchant tells them. Hermione thanks him again and follows the boy across the shop. She glances over her shoulder just in time to see the man gesture Malfoy to come closer. She pauses near the front door, turning to watch the two interact. The man asks Malfoy something in Arabic, nodding his head in Hermione's direction. Malfoy's eyes flick briefly toward Hermione, pausing temporarily on her before looking away entirely. The tips of his ears turning red, he responds, but all she can manage to hear him say is, Hayati? The merchant shakes his head again, an ominous frown carving into his face as he leans into Malfoy and whispers something too low for Hermione to make out, but makes Malfoy clench his hands in a fist. The second Malfoy steps outside, Hermione asks, What did he say? Malfoy shrugs, averting his gaze from her. Nothing important. Malfoy, just drop it, Granger. She studies his face, his tick jaw and tight-set lips. Something's not right, and she needs to know. Please tell me. He exhales sharply, still avoiding looking at her. He said to be careful of the lights. The lights? Hermione turns to look over her shoulder at the shop. What lights, Malfoy? There hasn't been any mention of lights by Mina or the others, and the diary lacked any note of lights. Or maybe there have been referrals to some sources of light, and Hermione has paid attention because she thought it was irrelevant to the cave itself. But the tension in his shoulders indicates that Malfoy's still hiding something, and she has a feeling it's what the merchant said about her specifically. She opens her mouth to inquire more when a young boy, Amin, takes her hand and gestures to her to hurry. The bookshop is an obscure building nestled in the corner of an alley. Green vines slither up the side of the gray stone building, and the leaves obstructing any view of sign. Shuttered windows make it difficult to see if there's anyone inside, and for a second she thinks maybe the store is closed down entirely. Malfoy tries the front door, which thankfully opens after a bit of resistance. The ding of bell announces their entrance into a dimly lit store, and the smell of rich spices mixed with wood immediately flood her senses. Golden warm hues from dripping candles light the corners of the shop to illuminate the quiet fluttering of opened books. There's no one else in the shop, nor can she find a shopkeeper. So Hermione strolls between the narrow aisles, gravitating to the books like a natural calling. She's not sure what she's looking for, and an Arabic script on some book makes it even more difficult to ascertain the contents. But she's hoping something similar to the script in her diary will stand out to her. Hermione turns over her shoulder to ask Malfoy to translate the title of one particular book when she notices Malfoy flip through a book she'd just put back onto the shelf. She pauses, considering. She takes out a book on the higher shelf to browse the title on the front cover, puts it back, and then pushes her finger on the spine of another. She moves down the aisle and watches from the corner of her eye as Malfoy takes both of the books off to inspect, only to put them back after a brief look. Hermione slides her finger across the spines of the books as she walks down the aisle. Malfoy follows the path with his own. She turns back around, biting back a smile. May I help you with something? Hermione startles at the deep voice. Looking up, into the darkness at the end of the aisle, a tall man wearing black robes steps into the candlelight. The dim light glints off the gold surface of a single hoop in the man's ear. Sharp, dark eyes lift between them. Hermione feels Malfoy's step close behind her. My name is Hakim, the man says, his tongue rolling over the syllables like water over smooth rocks. This is my shop. We were looking for some books for research, Hermione explains, digging into her bag for Sophia's diary. In particular, we're trying to find any information on this. Do you recognize this script? Hakim walks closer to Hermione, robes flowing like silk behind him. This close, he towers over both Hermione and Malfoy, and he waves his wand, and a bead of light hovers over the page. Hermione angles towards him. Where did you get this from? It's borrowed. You're looking for the cave, he states, stepping back and barely glancing at the diary. Kahif al-Nur. Do you recognize the script? Malfoy repeats firmly. An eerie sense of stillness radiates from Hakim as his dark eyes narrow on Malfoy before focusing on Hermione. I do. Hermione nods, feeling hopeful for once on getting some kind of lead. We would appreciate any text or information regarding these scripts. Anything at all would be helpful. Maybe a second glance will help. I will not go any near to that book you hold, Hakim says, taking a step back. Death is but a mercy, and any perversion of the sacred text is a blasphemy sure to bring ill. You search for the cave, but you are not prepared for what it might cost. Many lives have been taken in pursuit of this very myth. We are not asking about the cave, Malfoy snaps impatient. Either tell us what you know about the script or give us the books we need. What he's trying to say, Hermione quickly cuts in, shooting a glare at Malfoy that he ignores, is that we're looking for information specifically on the script now. If you have any separate information on the cave, we'd appreciate it. Ah, but the scripts in this diary and the cave you search for are one and the same, are they not? You are not the first to come here in hopes of the light. Over the years, travelers from all around the world come through this town, asking us questions and thinking they can find the cave. You are no different than the ones before, and I suspect you will not be the last. I can answer your questions, and I can lead you to the texts that I have, but are you ready to give up what the cave will require of you? Stiffening silence, except for a nearby crackling of candles, fills the space between the three. What do you know? Hermione asks, her heart beating at a familiar rhythm she hasn't felt in a long time, as fingers twitch as though reaching for something nearby. This is why she'd come on this trip. This feeling of anticipation in search of something more, something with inexplicable yet overwhelming meaning. While the mixture of what the flower merchant said and the clear hesitance in Hakim's face may deter others, Hermione only leans into it as a sign that she's close to figuring it all out. Hakim shakes his head, and Hermione catches a spark of disapproval in his eyes. I will show you what I have. He turns in a swift motion, disappearing into another aisle. Do you know what you're doing? Malfoy asks, before Hermione can follow after Hakim. Does anyone? He doesn't waver, doesn't bother to lower his voice. Granger, that's two people already. I knew this would happen, Hermione tells him in a hushed whisper. I've done enough research to know that the cave is almost near impossible to find and still came despite the records of people getting hurt. The question then is, why did you? He looks like he's on the verge of saying something, finally giving her his explanation, but instead he chooses to remain quiet and stare at her as if he's disappointed she hasn't already figured it out. Hermione fixes Malfoy a hard look before following after Hakim. Hakim is swallowed into the darkness, but Hermione catches the shift of his robes descending a steep staircase. The golden hues of the burning candles are transitioned into a shade of indigo in the dark stairwell. Easy, Malfoy murmurs, catching her by the elbow when she stumbles down a particular steep step. Hermione grasps hold of the cold stone wall to orient herself, mumbling a quick sorry. Hakim doesn't bother to look back as he leads them deeper and deeper beneath the shop, and Hermione thinks he might be taking them to the older archives. The stairs open into a tight chamber, lit once more with hovering lights. Hakim mumbles under his breath a spell, placing his hand over an invisible wall that shudders under his touch. And a second later, he steps through the wards, Hermione and Malfoy following after him. She has a strange feeling of stepping into a tomb. The room cold despite the many candles. Hakim waves his wand across the wall, beckoning floating books off the shelves and onto a large cluttered table. He lights a single candle on the table, shuffles through the stack, and takes out a large leather-bound book. He opens the book carefully, the pages creaking softly, and Hermione leans in to watch him flip through the pages. I have done some research in my time on the contents of the Library of Alexandria, Hakim says, squinting at the contents of a page before turning to the next. Though perhaps the truth is that the level of such content cannot be measured by lifetimes. I thought the library was erased of all accessible texts, Malfoy says. Hakim pauses his search to look at Malfoy. Knowledge cannot be destroyed. However, seeing how knowledge is power, it can be attained and mutated to benefit a certain perspective. Many of the ancient archives are stored and scattered across the world by whichever ruler or guardian deems it under their right to do so. It was through my scholarship in Egypt that I was able to acquire several of the texts in this shop. During my years of studies, I was introduced to a text that mentioned the acquisition of magical abilities distinct to Egyptian deities through descendants. The script in that diary of yours resembles the runes found in the reading that is connected to the pyramid text. Pyramid text? Hermione frowns at the familiarity of the word. You mean the funerary text dated to the Old Kingdom? Indeed, Hakim nods, his eyes flashing. Are you a scholar as well? Of sorts, Hermione responds, feeling the burn of Malfoy's eyes on her. The pyramid texts are renowned for harboring ancient mystic energy. The manipulation of any of the rituals cannot be conducted by mere mortals. I suppose it would require one to be blessed directly by a deity, or to be a descendant of one to have enough power. Hakim shuts the books and takes another out of his stack. He flips the book open and points to a page with a list of names that Hermione recognizes as belonging to Egyptian deities. Heka, Hermione whispers, reaching across to point out the name. Hakim swiftly swipes the book out of her touch. You recognize the name? Heka was the Egyptian god of medicine and magic, Malfoy replies, looking at Hermione. You said that Sophia was the descendant of a witch blessed by Heka. He was known to be associated through the energy of speech and the power that is found in the word. It was thought that runes associated with the pyramid texts were combined into separate, dense, comprehensive texts. Like a spellbook, Hermione asks. Much like a spellbook, the pyramid text consists primarily of ritual spells and instructional recitations that are connected to the ultimate transformation of the deceased into an Aka, the collective spirit of human soul that must undergo the final judgment after death. Do you have the books? There's no price to the pyramid text, Hakim tells Hermione, looking aghast at the suggestion. He turns back to the shelves, bringing down several more books. I do, however, have books on the pyramid text, and perhaps a book on the basics of the runes in your diary. You will have to put the information together yourself to decipher the different meanings. We'll take them, Hermione says, looking for her coin bag. I know you say you're aware of the consequences of looking for this cave, and I do not feign ignorance regarding the burden that you carry, Hakim says, nodding to the diary in Hermione's hands as he brings over the books to Hermione. The ones who have come before you have asked questions about the cave, but never about this specifically. It's been years since the last group to have looked for the cave, and I see it as my duty, from one student to another, to warn you that there are far worse things in the desert than wild dragons. You will lose something precious, and it need not be your life. Hermione stares at the tall man into his grave eyes that try to communicate more than what he's saying. What do you know about the lights? Hakim gives a short, breathless laugh, no mirth lines in his eyes. You've talked to the townsmen, I see, and yet you still come looking for more. We were warned of the lights. Hermione glances at Malfoy. She can't make out his expression, his face dimmed in the shadows, but the rigidity of the shoulders tells her he's thinking of what the merchant said as well. She needs to take him aside and ask what else the man told him. They're deemed by some as a bad omen. Many have seen the lights in the sky in the desert before a storm or an accident. It's been rumored for nearly 100 years that death is imminent after the sighting of one. Have you seen them yourself? There was a time in my life where they were not there, and then a time where they were. Hermione stares at him, trying to decipher just how old the man is when he doesn't look a day over 50. The man gives her a little smile when he sees her trying to put it all together. Knowledge is life. Would you not agree? The owner of this diary, Hermione says, did not mention the lights in the skies at all, or any warnings regarding them when looking for the cave. Hakim pauses from across the table to meet her eyes. Have there not been enough warnings that death is near? She can physically feel Malfoy's eyes roll, but the desert is known to be transcendent as it is. A few lights in the sky before the sandstorm that routinely ravages its lands is the least of the concerns of those who chose to remain there. We'll keep that in mind, thank you. Hakim hesitates, looking as though he might say something more, but changes his mind to start preparing the purchase instead. Hermione digs for coins when Malfoy drops the money before her on the table. I can pay for this, she tells him. I've been paying for everything, Granger, Malfoy drawls. Hermione contemplates arguing with him, but gives in when she realizes that he's right. She thinks instead, while the purchase is made, that Hakim packs the books. So many extra variables have been added, and she wonders why none of the things they've discovered today have even been noted before, either by Amina, Sophia, or in any of the expedition records. Perhaps they need to ask for more information around town, but the reaction of the merchant might be the general opinion of all the people. Besides, Amina had made it clear not to spread the word that we're looking for the cave, which would mean that Hermione needs to go back to the records with perhaps a new set of eyes. Hakim passes her the package, and Hermione reaches over for the books, muttering a distracted thanks. What did his demon say to you? Hermione's eyes snap to Hakim. Glazed dark eyes rimmed with a strange shade of golden stare back at her. The air stills and the hair on the nape rise at the shift change in the atmosphere. Heart thumping against her chest, her forearm suddenly starts to itch with a burning ache. Why do you hide when your demons are the same? Sure, she's misheard. Hermione tries to take a step back, but is stopped by a firm hold on the books. She tugs again, but Hakim doesn't let go. Instead, he continues looking back at her, expectantly and unblinking, with an expressionless face, waiting for her reply. She's unable to move, bones clenching in a vice, breath stuck in her throat. Granger. Hermione jumps, turning her head in Malfoy's direction. He takes a step toward her, brows furrowed. He asks if there's anything else you wanted. She turns back to Hakim, wide-eyed. Gone are the gold-rimmed eyes, the blank expression. Instead, he raises a single brow, eyes studying her face. No, sorry, she clears her throat. There's nothing else. Thank you for your help. Hermione takes the books, stuffs them in her bag, and hurries out of the chamber. Outside, Malfoy doesn't wait to ask, "What happened?" Hermione shakes her hand, gripping her left forearm at a familiar, unsettling feeling. Malfoy's eyes narrow at the hold before lifting back up to her, a question in his eyes, and Hermione drops her hand immediately. Granger. His voice is deep, drawing out her name slowly in warning that makes her glance at him. Hermione sighs, scratching her arm unconsciously once more, unsure even what she's heard or saw enough to tell him. The air erupts in an explosion, and the ground shakes with sudden force. Malfoy throws an arm over Hermione, bringing her close, but her head lifts in time to see a very large beast soar across the sky, wings spanning wide to obstruct the sun. Hermione shoves Malfoy away, whirling around to face him. Dragons. Well, that ended on a yeah, some dramatics there. Dragons. They found dragons. That's super cool. Okay. See you in the next chapter.